16 Prime Minister's Office Basement. Author, Wild Wolverine. 9 a.m. New Delhi, basement meeting room of the Prime Minister's office. None of the senior officials at the meeting thought that the Prime Minister would choose this place to hold the meeting. Prime Minister Kahan is a politician who is well versed in politics and has a lot of crazy ideas. He always has many unexpected ways to express and meet. The difference is that his arrangement today, in the eyes of Lieutenant General Aspard, is nothing more than reminding all officials that it is now a wartime system, and he is a wartime leader. After all the cabinet members and the generals of the three armed forces were seated, Prime Minister Kahan walked to the edge of the podium. It was a thin, grey-bearded old man who looked erudite and kind, but it was only an illusion. Said Hyde Khan, the Prime Minister's political line has always been known to be the toughest. In his first year in office, he visited Srinagar's military base twice, publicly calling it India's bridgehead against China. Immediately afterwards, the naval and air bases were expanded in the Andaman Islands, almost strangling the choke points entering and leaving the Bay of Bengal. At the same time, while the United States was busy cleaning up the terrorist organizations in western Pakistan, Prime Minister Kahan also used the pretext of anti-terrorism to clear the domestic relatives. Pakistan's Muslim faction condones Hindus to burn down mosques and support radical Hindu groups. The National Volunteer Service Corps and Hindu Datang Association have almost become quasi-military organizations that are not bound by law. The oppression eventually led to retaliation. 2 weeks ago, nearly 100 militants armed with rifles and explosives set off from the coast of Pakistan, infiltrated Mumbai and then went on a killing spree. The number of casualties exceeded 1,000, and the whole of India was swept by fury. The Lok Sabha overwhelmingly passed the latest anti-terrorism bill, giving the Prime Minister the power to do almost anything at the moment. Now, 3 days after Prime Minister Kahan took the power, he has decided to escalate the scale of the conflict to the level of state-to-state confrontation, and the war bill is still being debated in Parliament, but he is confident about it. Everyone, today is the first special security meeting convened by the National Council of Ministers. It is not open to the public. It is not limited to general executive officers. Senior officials of the military and intelligence agencies will participate. Prime Minister Kahan said slowly. Aspard had already seen many high-ranking officers outside the civilian system, and he was not the only military officer. Dear gentlemen, 2 weeks have passed since the inhumane massacre, and we await justice and justice with the utmost restraint. But what is our patience waiting for? I can tell you that the United Nations mediation representatives are in a few hours ago. It landed in Pakistan. Khan paused for a while, and the ministers below were not too surprised, because the UN's trip was public, and it was planned to go to India first, but the Prime Minister himself rejected it. Since the United Nations considers it more important to listen to the perpetrators' nonsense, then our government cannot accept the neutrality of this mediation. Prime Minister Kahan said, banging his thin fist on the table. It is clear from the outset that the Prime Minister does not want peace. Everyone understands that. This is the same as the first paragraph of his speech to the Parliament a day ago. It all implies that India will jump over the United Nations and take unilateral action. Kahan is well versed in political maneuvering, and now is the best chance for revenge. The whole of India has been caught in a rage, from rank-and-file staff to students at the University of New Delhi, who have recently been discussing war and revenge. Since the international community has been blinded, India will unilaterally take all effective actions to defend our justice, and the blood of the Indian people will never be shed in vain. Of course, blindness and impulsiveness are our great enemies, and our actions. The cornerstone is not our anger, but our intelligence unit, political or otherwise, Khan said, glancing at his intelligence chief. Chief Charman sat in the shadows in the corner, smiling back at the Prime Minister on stage, who had mentioned his department at the beginning of his speech. There is a notebook in front of the director, but there is not a single word in it. Charman is used to recording all things with his brain instead of pen and paper. Carrying the notebook with him is the same as he wears flat glasses. Is to make myself more like an administrative bureaucrat. His position has been subject to the Ministry of the Interior for a long time, but after Kahan came to power, this unbearable situation finally ended. The Prime Minister needs the intelligence unit to report directly to him, so the actual status of the Intelligence Bureau has surpassed the Ministry of the Interior, and Chaman himself has become the most valued person by Prime Minister Khan after Defence Minister Singh. Khan's speech continues, he is making a big detour, and the topic fluctuates between diplomacy and counter-terrorism, but most of the participants can guess that the Prime Minister's ultimate goal is to go to war, and what everyone does not know is that only how big the war will be. Aspard noticed that in Prime Minister Khan's long speech today, he repeatedly mentioned the words solving the problem once and for all, which made the Army Chief of Staff sitting below feel that all his ominous hunches would definitely come true. Since the collapse of Al-Qaeda, Pakistan's value to the United States is eroding. No, I think it is actually disappearing. The Americans certainly know that bin Laden is hiding 60 kilometers north of Islamabad, completely arranged by the Pakistani ISIS, because they are one gang. India will become the most ideological ally of the United States in the future, but the United States has not fully realized it yet, so our actions caused some diplomatic troubles in a short period of time, but we will finally make our friends understand our painstaking efforts, and our purpose is the same as theirs, which is to solve South Asia once and for all, which is also the largest hotbed of terrorism in the world. Khan stopped after finishing a paragraph. Unlike the scene of his speech in Parliament, there was no cheering or applause below, only Defence Minister Singh's pretentious nod, and most people just whispered anxiously. So, anyone who is worried about international interference is deviating from the simple fact that India is the biggest cornerstone of the democratic world. Our foreign ministry should keep reminding the West that the only nuclear arsenal in the Islamic world is in Pakistan. Pakistan will soon secretly sell nuclear weapons to Iran or terrorist organizations. This is the most realistic threat to the civilized world, and if India can remove such troubles for the world once and for all, I believe that in the long run, the Western world will understand our troubles. Aspard turned his head slightly, glanced at Foreign Minister Chandra, and found that he was wiping away sweat, his face as white as a piece of paper, and he was probably slandered by Prime Minister Kahan. The war mobilization was terrified. Ladies and gentlemen, you should know that any powerful country has the right to do what it will, just as the United States did to Afghanistan or Iraq. There is nothing to be ashamed of acknowledging that India is already such a powerful country. Please remember, take my word for it, always listen to the voice of the people, listen to what they think, so you don't feel fear. Kahan's declaration of war did little for Aspard, who, in the army chief's view, the idea of the people is nothing but an inevitable consequence of the crazy incitement of populism after the BJP came to power. Now, everyone can talk. What do you think of our further actions? Prime Minister Kahan's speech finally came to an end, and he glanced at the venue, wondering the audience's reaction. The audience began to whisper in earnest.